That was a gracious introduction by both the Consul General and my good friend now, Vijay Dandapani. I prepared a speech tonight to cover a lot of ground. I am, by Washington definition, a policy wonk, so these are subjects that very much interest me, and I would like to first touch upon general trends I see in India over the past year or two, speak a bit about U.S.-India relations, as it was mentioned, and then talk about some of the common security challenges the United States and India face. First Pakistan, and then if there's time, maybe we can speak about China as well. So just to begin and briefly touch upon some of the good and bad trends I've seen in India over the past year. I guess I'd start with India's economy and its ability to weather the financial crisis. India grew at 8.3% last year, which is a commendable rate of growth given the international circumstances. You know, this Hindu rate of growth of 3.5% is a thing of the past. India is galloping towards modernity, and it's quite impressive. It's making moves to open up a lot of the industries, like the telecom sector, retail, defense sectors. I think these are all positive moves. It's looking to expand the percentage, move from 26 to 49%. Cap on investment in its defense sector. I think this is something that will help it build a modern military, one of its primary goals. You saw, as was earlier mentioned, a parade of world leaders coming through India over the past year. All 4 members of the Security Council coming to India, signing tens of billions of dollars in deals, large delegations of business executives, and all those countries, with the exception of China, endorsed a seat for India at the United Nations Security Council. And a little-known story, many of you may know this story, I thought it was interesting, that China was the only country that has not come out and formally endorsed India. And in 1955, during the Cold War, it was India that turned down China's Security Council seat. Now, this was not formally offered to India, but the United States and Russia both had the idea that India could take Communist China's seat at the Security Council. And at the time, Nehru deferred and said, you know, China's a great power. This would cause tensions between us. So I'm going to defer that, and I don't want to go down that road. Now here we are, you know, 50 years later, 55 years later, and China is the lone holdout, not preventing India, but refusing to endorse a seat for them. So I thought that was an interesting contrast. Some of the things that worry me a little more, trends in India, while I think the economy has been progressing nicely, inflation, and this is actually something Prime Minister Manmohan Singh spoke to today. He said it's an increasing threat to growth. It's 8.3%, and among some foodstuffs it's 17%. I mean, that's something that you can have the illusion of high growth, but if inflation is eating away at the value of your money, that growth is just an illusion. So that's something that needs to be tamped down. I think in general, economic reforms need to be picked up. You know, there was elections in 2009. Many of the leftist communist parties were not brought into the coalition, and people thought, you know, this is a chance for Manmohan Singh and the Congress Party to institute some of the reforms that maybe the left had been, you know, holding back on. Unfortunately, we have not seen the pace and type of reform that we had hoped. I think a lot of that is because India has been consumed with domestic issues over the past year or two. Telangana, unrest in Andhra Pradesh, has been a big one. The telecom scandal, Commonwealth Games scandal, every time I read the Indian press, this is the headline. Corruption, scandals. And this needs to be rooted out. This is obviously an important issue, it needs to be focused on, but it's crowding out interest and activity in other fields. The Maoists, you know, this is another deeply significant problem, one that few in the West really understand. You know, there was one attack last year in Chhattisgarh, where 75 policemen were killed, the Central Reserve Police Force. I mean, there hasn't been an attack in Afghanistan ever with 75 people being killed. In a 10-year war, I think 15 is the most people that U.S. soldiers that have ever been killed. You know, the death total alone from Maoist violence last year was 1,100 people. The U.S. death total in Afghanistan was 499. There's over twice as many people. So this is a very serious threat. Manmohan Singh has called it the greatest internal security challenge. So, you know, another thing that does not get much coverage here in the West, I wish our policymakers understood it better, and I wish India luck in pursuing that. So, to move briefly to India-U.S. relations, I'm hopeful, broadly. I mean, the story of the past 10 years is a very good one, of an opening up, of a shedding of a lot of this baggage of the Cold War. You know, it's really amazing what has happened here. Two very major, significant powers having a complete reversal of fortunes and going from, you know, awkward, you know, certainly not partners. I mean, I don't even know how to describe the United States-India relationship before President Bush, but certainly since 9/11, this has grown into something great. Now, since President Obama came into office, there were some concerns, and there was some early hiccups. You know, he had made some noises about putting in a special representative for Kashmir to arbitrate the dispute. He had supported but added a poison pill to the U.S.-India nuclear deal when he was a senator. You know, when he became president, his inaugural trip to Asia, he visited China but not India. So I think, you know, many in India were skeptical or concerned that President Obama would not follow in the footsteps of his predecessor, who was one of the most pro-Indian presidents in American history. I think since his visit in November, at least the optics of the relationship have gotten better. You know, interestingly, he did not visit Pakistan on that visit. This is part of an effort by the U.S. started under President Bush to dehyphenate India-Pakistan. This does not need to be you know, every time a U.S. president visits India, he does not need to go and pay homage to Pakistan as well. We have independent relations with both countries. So President Obama followed up on that, and when he was in India, everyone knows he endorsed the United Nations Security Council seat. Perhaps as important, he said the United States would be removing two major Indian research firms, the Indian Space Research Organization and Defense Research Development Organization, from U.S. sanctions lists, somewhere they've been since 1998. And actually just this past week, you know, the machinations of government, it often takes a while for these administrative tasks to get done, but they were finally actually removed from the list. So that should open up a lot of doors for better U.S.-India cooperation in advanced tech fields, defense fields. The U.S. will have more leeway to export high technology military goods. So I think it was an important advance. President Obama is also working on getting India into the nuclear non-proliferation regime. India has been somewhat of a pariah in this field, and beginning under President Bush, you know, the U.S. has tried to make India it has been a responsible nuclear power. I think that's part of the reason President Bush made this move. India has a very good proliferation record, despite being outside of the NPT and many of these international bodies. And we're working on getting India into some of these international non-proliferation regimes, such as the NSG, MTCR. And President Obama started a strategic dialogue with India, something that we've been doing with China. So we were starting to put India on par. Cabinet-level officials meeting last year was in Washington, D.C. This year, Secretary Clinton and a very large delegation of U.S. officials will be going to India, probably in April. And in fact, just this week, Gary Locke, the U.S. Commerce Secretary, will be over in India this weekend with a large delegation of U.S. businessmen. So the relationship is still, you know, I think it took a step backwards under Obama, and I still think President Obama can do more to improve the relationship, but we are making progress. However, I would say and let me just expand on a few of the points where I think we could make progress. A few points of difference between us. And Afghanistan, I guess, is one of the most important ones. And It's an interesting point of difference because the United States and India share very similar goals in Afghanistan. We both want a democratic society. We both want a country that does not host and export terrorism. We both want a thriving, peaceful Afghanistan. India, actually, like many in the U.S., have been reluctant to announce a time frame for withdrawal and have been reluctant to negotiate with the Taliban. Now, there's a pretty fierce debate going on in Washington about the value and virtue of either of those options as well, but President Obama has committed himself to a date for withdrawal, and we are now entertaining ideas of negotiating with the Taliban. This is something that concerns India. And India obviously has a vested interest in what happens in Afghanistan, being in the region. You know, we are a couple thousand miles away, so India looks at it from a much different perspective, and I think the United States needs to do a better job taking their interests into consideration. Having said that, you know, this is an extremely difficult challenge, and we are ourselves searching for better and better policy all the time. So it's something that needs to be on the map for U.S. policymakers, and it's somewhere where I think the United States and India need to coordinate their policy better. Another point of contention, the nuclear deal. You know, President Bush, Manmohan Singh in 2005 consummated this nuclear deal that brought India in from the cold, international nuclear regime. And when it was finally actualized in India, it's come with a bit of a poison pill itself. The way that the Indian Parliament passed the law made it so that not only operators of nuclear plants, but suppliers could be sued in the case of liability, in the event of an accident. And this is something that American companies and international companies are not comfortable with. Even Indian companies have said that this would be difficult to work around. So this is another area where the U.S. and India, I think, need to work. You know, this is a massive project we are involved in together, and it'd be a shame to have this administrative hiccup in the language of the bill undermine that. But these are very minor issues, I think, in the context of U.S.-India relationship. And I'd quote from my own piece to say that, you know, indeed the U.S.-Indian partnership can endure diplomatic hiccups because the underlying geopolitical motivation behind the partnership is sound. America does not feel threatened by India's rise, and India does not feel threatened by America's power in Asia. I think that sums up why this is a fruitful and natural partnership and why we've been able to cover such ground in such a short period of time. I'd like at this time to turn to Pakistan as a common security challenge for both the United States and India. I have been very upfront about my views on Pakistan in my articles and in interviews. I am deeply concerned about the state of affairs there. I am deeply troubled by the involvement of elements of the Pakistani government and military in supporting Islamist groups. And, you know, whenever I sit down and gather my thoughts on Pakistan to prepare for a speech or an article, I often feel like I'm in the twilight zone. I mean, it just doesn't add up. For an example, United States aid to Pakistan has been a contentious point for India, for many of us here in the U.S. The Associated Press investigated U.S. aid to Pakistan between 2002 and 2008. $6.6 billion was spent. Do you know how much of that reached the intended target?